Hello. I've never made a video essay or a YouTube video in my entire life. In fact, I am chronically offline. I don't have any social media. It's very rare that I'm anywhere on the internet, which means that this will be interesting. But everyone I know says that I'm a yapper, and I talk quite a lot about the things that I'm interested in, and I especially get very analytical about all the things that I'm interested in. So I decided, why not start making video essays? And I'm recording with my phone because I don't even have a microphone, but I will get a microphone if this goes well and I enjoy it. My friend Elle and I, we're going to make videos together, and Elle is probably going to do more like reaction sort of things and book reviews, and I'm probably going to do more essays and more dissecting things for the details. And I'm sorry that you cannot see my face very well because I'm using my phone as a microphone. I'm going to sync the audio from the phone with the iPad, and it's going to be tedious, but it's a sacrifice we must make. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is I'm going to kind of go into children's media, and specifically children's media that's been dismissed as being too mature for the age group. It's seen as this is not something that's sufficiently childlike, which is arbitrary and doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm talking about specifically going into three particular examples. I'm going to be kind of going through history with this. I'm going to be talking about The Secret Garden. I'm going to be talking about Oscar Wilde's fairy tales, and I'm going to be talking about Infinity Train. So this is what I'm going to talk about. Yes. Most of this is scripted. It's very obvious that this introduction is not scripted because obviously I'm not very good at gathering my words when I don't write them down, unfortunately. I will get better, and I'm also not very good on camera, so bear that in mind. First, I'm going to talk about Frances Hodgson Burnett, who is the author of The Secret Garden, Little Lord Fauntleroy, a bunch of other children's stories that aren't as popular today. And the story of hers that we remember the most is definitely The Secret Garden. I would argue that's because we know what it's like to be a frustrated, tired kid who wants their own special place that's just for them. Little Lord Fauntleroy, on the other hand, doesn't really appeal to anyone, and it's largely unknown today. It's about a perfect little boy who discovers that he's heir to a magnificent estate. And the story at least makes a point that if you're ridiculously wealthy, then you have a responsibility to use that wealth to help others. But he's this cutesy, wholesome little boy in a stupid little suit who really only serves to teach the cynical older characters a lesson. It's not really a story for children, because the child character has no dimension. It's a story that makes adults feel good about children, and inspired them to dress their little boys in ugly blouses and these ruffled collars and these ringlet curls. If I were a child in that era, I would be so done, honestly. Kids want to run around and play and not sit for pictures. The Secret Garden endures and continues to be read by children because even though it's dated, it's saccharine and racist and ableist, the main character, Mary, is a painfully real child. Neglected by her wealthy parents and raised by hired caretakers in India, she spends her early childhood completely spoiled, but emotionally stunted. When her parents die in a cholera epidemic and she's sent to live with her uncle in Yorkshire, she's full of resentment. She never really knew her parents, but without them, she's now completely alone and in a strange place. All she knows is her own entitlement, which alienates everyone who tries to nurture her. Instead of being depicted like little Lord Fauntleroy as the adorable Victorian and Edwardian ideal of a child, Mary is bossy and insufferable at first, before she gradually becomes a better person. She's a complex character who responds as a child actually would, which makes her readable and sympathetic, however self-centered and irritating she initially is. The Secret Garden, nonetheless, was first serialized in the American Magazine, a publication aimed at adults. This is unlike Little Lord Fauntleroy, which was serialized in St. Nicholas, which was a children's magazine. This caused The Secret Garden, when it was later published as a novel, to be marketed for adults, with some overlap in the children's market. Because Clearly, all the little children want to pose for photographs in their frilly little collars and are too busy doing that, and only a few would ever want to read about a girl whose entire household either died of cholera or abandoned her. Also, you should all watch the Secret Garden musical from the 90s. It is one of my favorite things in the entire world, and nobody talks about it. When I ask people if they know it, they say, "What are you talking about? There's a Secret Garden musical? Why?" And I'm like, you should watch it. It has the guy who played Inigo Montoya in The Princess Bride in it. It's good. You should find it. You should listen to it. Okay, I'm moving on. Only 20 years prior, Oscar Wilde's fairy tales received the same treatment for their darker themes. In The Nightingale and the Rose, for instance, the moral is unsettlingly grim. A nightingale spies a young student from her nest who is loudly complaining about how a girl will never love him until he brings her a red rose. The nightingale is deeply affected by his story and cries out that, "Night after night I have sung of him, though I didn't realize it. Night after night I have told his story to the stars, and now I see him." A passing butterfly calls his weeping for a red rose ridiculous, but the bird ignores him. Instead, she flies to all the trees she can find, asking them for a red rose to help the boy. But none of their roses are red. The last tree she finds, however, does grow red roses, but cannot produce any because of the cold. When the nightingale presses him further, he says, "If you want a red rose," said the tree, "you must build it out of music by moonlight and make it red with your own heart's blood. You must sing to me with your breast against a thorn, and your blood must flow into my veins and become mine." And so the nightingale sings and sings all night while impaling herself on the tree's thorns, bleeding onto the tree, and only as she dies does the tree bloom with red roses at last. The student arrives in the morning and does not notice her dead on the ground. He picks up a rose, delighted, and brings it to the girl he loves. She immediately rejects him, telling him it doesn't go with her dress and that the prince's nephew brought her jewels. The story ends, "How ungrateful," said the student angrily, and he threw the rose into the street where it fell into the gutter. What a silly thing love is, he thought as he walked away. It's not half as useful as logic, and in fact is quite impractical. I shall go back to philosophy. And so he returned to his room and pulled out a dusty book and began to read. And that's it. That's the end. All this after the nightingale violently killed herself, believing wholeheartedly that she was sacrificing herself for the beauty of love. The rose she put her very lifeblood into is thrown into the gutter, and the student will never realize or care about the nightingale's devotion. It's an incredibly haunting story, and for me that's largely because of its visceral imagery. A bird stabbing herself on a thorn as she sings, giving up her life for the momentary folly of some boy, just because she believes it's the glorious kind of love that she sings about. It's also ambiguous, which is rare for children's stories of that era. It doesn't end happily, rewarding its heroes for their righteousness and commitment to their morals. Instead, the nightingale just dies. She doesn't get granted a miracle, and all of her efforts are for naught. It's soberingly realistic, a fairy tale for the actual Victorian age, not the Victorian ideal. Society caught up in the middle of aestheticism was beautiful, but ultimately shallow and neglectful of genuine emotion. In the preface for The Picture of Dorian Gray, the only novel that he ever published, Wilde wrote, "There is no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all." He continues, "It is the spectator and not life that art truly mirrors. Diversity of opinion about a work of art shows that the work is new, complex, and vital." Oscar Wilde doesn't underestimate children. He treats his young audience just the same as his adult audience. He challenges their hypocrisy and contradictions through fantastical allegories. In 1888, however, the Sunday Review published a review of Wilde's fairy tale collection Happy Prince and Other Tales that reads, "Oscar Wilde, no doubt for excellent reasons, has chosen to present his fables in the form of fairy tales to a public which, though it should count among its numbers most persons who can appreciate delicate humor in an artistic literary manner, will assuredly not be composed of children. Children do not care for satire, and the dominant spirit of these stories is satire. A bitter satire, differing widely from that of Hans Andersen, whom Mr. Wilde's literary manner so constantly recalls to us. This quality of bitterness, however, does not repel the reader." This social critique element to his writing frequently drew criticism throughout his career. Even after the picture of Dorian Gray was modified to tone down some of the queer themes of the text, the book was called mawkish, nauseous, and contaminating. Some reviewers even argued that Wilde deserved persecution for violating public morality laws. Passages from the novel were later used in Wilde's 1895 trial to prove his quote-unquote gross indecency. Everyone, of course, overlooking the fact that the book intentionally reflected back their own immorality. In his collection of literary essays titled Intentions, Wilde referenced the Saturday Review, starting one observation with, "No doubt there will always be critics who, like a certain writer in the Saturday Review, will gravely censure the teller of fairy tales." I would guess that he read the same review of his fairy tales that I did and chose to call out the exact publication that misjudged his work. And I like to think that Wilde's fairy tales were good for the children of the 1800s. They're gorgeously written, conscious of the more selfish parts of human nature, and sometimes a little traumatizing. As a kid, I frequently read the original Hans Christian Andersen stories, taking in their dark themes kind of giddily. I found it thrilling to read about the Little Mermaid turning into sea foam, or the stepsisters cutting off their toes or having their eyes pecked out by birds. I never considered the possibility that they weren't for me. All I knew was that it was a relief not to be condescended to. I appreciated being trusted to understand complex ideas, even when those stories included frightening elements. And I continue to stand by that today. Kids deserve media that introduces them to difficult subjects, even if it's scary, even if it's challenging. They need media that's for them. And that isn't to say adults can't enjoy that media too, but they need media that was created with them in mind. We shouldn't dictate what children are too young to understand because it's not a matter of understanding. Kids can understand anything. It's a matter of what the child can withstand and what's simply not appropriate for the age group. It shouldn't be a matter of, oh, well, a kid can't wrap their head around that. It should be a matter of how do we tell this story so it's approachable for a kid. But on the other hand, media that genuinely ask that second question are often dismissed as not child-friendly, like Wilde's fairy tales or even outright buried. Infinity Train was a Cartoon Network and later an HBO show between 2019 and 2021. If you haven't heard of it, that's completely as intended. Its demise began soon after it switched from Cartoon Network to HBO Max in 2020. This change initially benefited the show, as its character-driven, cohesive story arcs far better suited a streaming service than channel surfing. In 2020, it was actually the fourth most watched show on HBO. But in 2022, it was removed after a merger disrupted a lot of the service's programming. This was after Infinity Train had been denied a fifth season because it had, quote, no child entry point. Since then, the story's social media posts, official YouTube videos, and merchandise have vanished. Surprising, in fact, even the creators of the show themselves, who were not informed of the decision. It's almost as though the show never existed.
That's the thing, is like people, when you go in, there's often this like, and so who's the audience for? Who do you want this? This is for children or this is for adults? What do you want? And I'm like, no, anybody can watch this. I don't care. Like, I feel like when I was a kid, things were like what counted as something that was for children and what counted as something that was not for children was a lot more gray than it is now.
In this next portion, I am going to be giving spoilers for literally the entire show, and I really would like more people to watch it and enjoy it, so please, if you want to, find it. It's not on any streaming, but there are other ways that you can find it. So go watch it. Go watch it, like, soon as you possibly can, and enjoy it because it's a very good show, and I don't want to spoil it for you. Okay. I'm going to continue. I'm going to talk really fast because I'm summarizing all 4 seasons of the show. Season 1 follows a girl named Tulip struggling with her parents' recent divorce who runs away from home to go to game design camp and ends up boarding a mysterious train in the middle of nowhere. When she steps onto it, she blacks out and wakes up on a train with infinitely many cars, each containing its own universe. And on Tulip's hand, a strange glowing number changes as she learns lessons as a person. Traveling alongside an odd little robot and the king of corgis, Tulip grows to understand herself and cope with her problems before her number reaches 0 and her door home finally opens. Also, the train's conductor is an imposter, a woman named Amelia who took control of it to try to recreate her old life before her partner died. Tulip restores the true conductor of the train, who turns out to be her robot companion, leaves Amelia to try to get her own number back down to 0, and at last learns to accept change. Season 2 follows Tulip's reflection. In one episode in Season 1, Tulip enters a chrome car and is tricked by her own reflection, who has been involuntarily trapped mirroring Tulip for their entire life and wants to escape. Tulip eventually helps her reflection be free so they can live as their own person. In Season 2, we see that the reflection, who calls himself MT, aka Mirror Tulip, is still on the run from the reflection police. They befriend and travel alongside a passenger named Jesse, who's a victim of peer pressure and therefore, like MT, struggles with being a reflection against his will. Wow. They also have this cool deer with powers named Alan Dracula. Towards the end of the season, the three of them encounter a cult of kids on the train called the Apex, who believe the goal is to increase their numbers and that the denizens of the train, like MT and Alan Dracula, are not real. Jesse successfully resists being a follower, his number reaches 0, and he gets to go home, but MT, because they aren't a passenger, can't follow him through his door. MT kills a cop, tries and fails to take a number from a newly arrived passenger, demolishes a bunch of machinery in rage, and then learns from the conductor that Jesse is back on the train. The two of them persuade the conductor to let them off through some convoluted logic, and MT at last is free. They also decide on a name, Lake. Season 3 follows the leaders of the Apex, two teenagers named Grace and Simon. After being stranded from the rest of their group, they encounter a child named Hazel and her adopted mother, a purple gorilla named Tuba. Grace becomes protective of Hazel on the journey, but Simon believes Tuba as a denizen is slowing them down and kills her. Grace and Simon clash as their cult's philosophies proven false. Grace's number gradually begins to go down, and Simon becomes dangerously possessive of her. The season ends with one of the train's roach monsters very graphically killing Simon, and Grace promising to right her wrongs. Season 4 is easily the lightest of them and follows two Canadian besties in the 80s who have always dreamed of starting a band but struggled to communicate and reconnect with each other. They end up on the train with synced numbers because the problem that they're facing is their relationship, and they eventually reconcile. They're also gay, maybe? I don't know. The season is also set at the same time that the false conductor from Season 1, Amelia, was in the middle of taking over the train. It was intended to serve as a moment of levity that balances the darkness of Season 5, which would occur simultaneously and focus on Amelia. Unfortunately, having a grieving adult woman as a protagonist in a children's show was seen as inaccessible to the target audience, and so the entire show died before there could ever be a Season 5. That's the entirety of Affinity Train, summarized in I don't know how many minutes because I had to do retakes because it's hard to talk fast. The show's creator, Owen Dennis, pushed to make the show increasingly more mature and more diverse, wanting to expand to even more relatable issues for its characters. Because people liked Infinity Train. They felt seen. But some subjects, however real, were considered too controversial to depict on screen. That being the main characters of Season 2, Lake and Jesse, being trans and Native American respectively. In an interview, Dennis describes the pushback from the network over Jesse.
I was like, oh, I want to be this native character. And they were like, no, absolutely not. You can't do that. And I was like, why? And they were like, well, it's because, you could have chosen any race, but that one's just like, that one's a really hard one. That's like a big third rail. And I was like, okay, but I just want I want consultant to come in and we can talk about it a bit and all that sort of stuff. And they're like, no, absolutely not. And it took, I want to say about 7 months of convincing to get them to be okay with it. And then I remember I had to have a special private talk with them and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. The only mention that he ever makes is in one episode where he talks about going to powwow or something. And that was something that I specifically was talking with a consultant about. And we were only able to make that reference because we had some other line there that was, I don't even remember what it was. We had some of the line there, but we were recording. I was like, oh, I asked if we could we just record this one line quick and just get it into the show? And they're like, yeah, sure.
Unfortunately, this decision makes sense. Not in that it's justifiable, but that it aligns with the precedent in children's programming that has only become more intense in America with the current conservative political climate. And as for Lake, depicting not only a trans person, but a narratively active trans person whose identity is crucial to their character arc, but not to educate cisgender people. A trans person who fights against the system oppressing them, who violently retaliates and defends themselves against cops, who demands to be seen as a human instead of being just accepting that this is the way that it is. Unfortunately, they would not have gotten away with that. But guess what they were somehow able to keep? Absolutely all of that, minus the actual verbal confirmation that Lake is trans.
Wow. Do reflections go to the bathroom?
Okay, question time's over. Oh, look at me! I am a person! I deserve a number! Ah!
I don't know. I was watching it for the first time with my friends a few years ago, and we were all like, yeah, good for them, look at them, by default, when they, like, cut their hair and everything at the start of the season, and, like, I thought it was canon, and we all thought it was canon, and then apparently it's not. I don't know. I don't even know. But in a since-deleted thread on X in 2020, Dennis discussed the value of fan interpretations of his works, and noted in the context of LGBTQ+ representation that sometimes you're just straight up told you can't include that character or idea or something, and since they're your boss and they have the money, you can't. So the question becomes, do you try to say the word and risk the show or book not being published or not allowed in certain countries? Or do you not use the word but still tell your story with metaphor, and everyone who needs to see it and hear it will be able to access it? We don't have definitive confirmation that Lake was intended to be trans, and that's likely because Dennis himself was not allowed to explicitly discuss it. But, in many ways, the open-endedness of Lake's experiences is even more validating. Infinity Train assures kids that it's okay to be scared and angry, and that you often have to fight to defend your very identity. It tells kids that you are complete, even if you don't know quite who you are yet, and that the only one allowed to define who you are is yourself. It's a message for everyone, regardless of how much their personal journey is linked to gender. Likewise, Season 3, the most violent, emotionally devastating season, excellently conveys its lessons in a way that utilizes the form of an animated children's series. It dares to answer some of the darkest questions that the show's premise naturally sparks. What happens when you can't grow emotionally and get your number down to 0? What is it like for your life to become the train and for you to view the cars and their denizens as mere resources to serve your needs? What do you have to do to get your number that high? And how can you possibly redeem yourself and heal from that? But, like the show's representation, this content was towing the line from the perspective of executives, even though kids' reception to the show really just depends on the kid and their level of sensitivity. The way the show escalates is done very well, after all. Season 3 comes after Lake kills 2 cops in Season 2, and Season 2 comes after the dog Atticus is shot and turned into a roach monster in Season 1. If someone is overwhelmed or frightened, they can easily back away until they're slightly older. But from my experience, kids, especially tweens, like darkness and angst. Season 3 is not a happy story, but not every story is happy. And unlike other stories that kids may stumble across, there's no mistaking that compassion and choosing to change are the morals of the season. Meanwhile, on the other hand, there's this hilarious review of a Warrior Cats novella about a cat who goes on a murderous rampage. This book really explains the hardships of life. In my opinion, Mapleshade is strong. Ravenwing, Frecklewish, and Appledusk deserve to die. They don't understand love. They're just as mean as Broken Star, maybe even meaner. I believe that the Dark Four-Set cats are just misunderstood. Tigerclaw and Mapleshade are great cats. I haven't read a Warrior Cat book in years, but I think about this review a lot, because I can't really do a literary analysis of a book I haven't read since middle school. But if this book ever made it entirely clear that bloody revenge is bad, which I don't remember it ever really doing, I'm sorry for the Warrior Cat slander. This kid definitely did not pick up on that. Infinity Train is an undeniably kind show about personal growth and empathy, which are especially important for kids who are in the middle of that growth. There are plenty of things out there that encourage you to be who you are, but there isn't as much that beautifully proves that who you are can change, and that's okay. You might be Lake, escaping the stifling expectations of you to become your own person. You might be Grace, realizing in horror that you haven't always been a good person, but trying your best to move on and prove yourself different. You might be Tulip, scared that your life is about to change drastically in a way that leaves you behind. And that's what makes it children's media. Not that it's childish and shallow, but that it's written for children to see themselves and learn. Really great stories for kids are accessible and full of depth for age groups beyond that demographic. But that maturity, that depth that can be all too easily left out of stories because it's just for kids, supposedly changes a piece of media's correct audience. Stories that are too mature are supposedly too difficult to grasp, too morally gray and disturbing, even if they were created within all the guidelines for a children's story. It's assumed that provoking strong emotional reactions in children, or assuming their intelligence is high, is too extreme. No child entry point, they say. Or persons who can appreciate delicate humor in an artistic literary manner will assuredly not be composed of children. The same sentiments are echoed across generations, and it's demeaning. But in spite of that, it's partially understandable. We have this compulsive feeling that we need to protect children and keep them safe. When something affects us, makes us feel frightened or upset, we naturally try to shield children from that distress. When we hurt, we don't want those under our protection to be hurt. But on the other hand, there are moments when hurt is needed for a person to develop. Kids need to fall and scrape their knees at least once to learn to be cautious and withstand more intense pain in the bigger world. And when it comes to intellectual development, kids need to grow in their awareness of the world and discover how to navigate it. That means realizing that the world doesn't always care about you. It's cold and apathetic towards your feelings and often wants to hurt you. But that shouldn't mean that you should lose your ability to care. That's why teachers always urge children to read fiction when they're young. Seeing ourselves in characters who struggle is essential to cultivating empathy and resilience. So yes, I hope that you enjoyed all of that. I've never done anything like this before in my life. Keep this in mind. So if you want more, then you should whatever it is you do, you should like and subscribe. I talk like someone's grandpa because I've never been on any like social medias or like I don't know. So I'll do my best to continue making cool things if people enjoy hearing my thoughts on things and my analysis. Yes. Farewell.